Cities Adaptation to Climate Change in EECCA. This webinar was organized by n-ost and the CAN EECCA network. n-ost is running a project that is on online journalism. It's called Online Journalism in Depth. And one of the topics the project is dealing with is climate change. So we are really happy to cooperate with CAN EECCA in organizing this webinar. My name is Anneke Hudalla. I'm a project manager at n-ost, and I'm a colleague of Irina, who unfortunately cannot talk today. So this is why I'm moderating this session today. As you may know, COP28 started last week in Dubai, and today is one of the thematic days dedicated to urbanization and cities. And in line with this global event, our webinar aims to dive deeply into crucial questions and discussions surrounding urban adaptation to climate change, specifically within the Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia region. And I'm really happy to introduce to you our experts that we have today. The first is Dr. Maria Falaleeva. She originates from Belarus, but has been living in Ireland for a long time already. And she is a very internationally very well-known expert in the field of sustainable urban development and adaptation to climate change. She is head of the board of the international NGO EECCA Project, and she has worked as a consultant to many international organizations, among them the United Nations. Welcome, Maria. The second speaker is Mariam Devidze.
Thank you.
Mariam is working in the Georgian NGO Green Alternative in Tbilisi, where she's responsible for the environmental and climate change program. And she has been doing climate research for quite some time in Scotland. Her research interests are climate finance, locally led adaptation, climate change impacts, and intersectionality. Welcome, Mariam. So we first will have the two presentations, and after that we will have a discussion. If you have questions or comments, please put them all in the chat, and after the presentation, our experts will be happy to answer your questions. A last hint from my side, if you wish to listen to this webinar, not in English, but in Russian, you can press the button in the bottom part of the frame you can see, and there you can choose the channel, the language channel, and the translation, and then you can listen to the webinar in Russian. Yeah, thank you very much so far, and Maria, the floor is yours.
Спасибо большое, Анеке. Сейчас я...
Thank you so much, Anneke. Give me a second. I will share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Думаю, что должно быть видно.
Yes, I think that you do see it. Irina, could you please nod your head? Yeah, okay, I see you're nodding. Hello, once again, esteemed participants. And it is true, as Anneke rightly mentioned, COP28 is ongoing at the moment. And in the recent years, I would say in the recent decades, a lot of attention is paid to the cities in this context. And if you're not that well aware of the process of international climate policy and how everything is happening at the UNFCCC COP conference, I believe that we'll know that the Paris Agreement that was adopted in 2016 became the starting point and basically the main document that shapes and frames international climate policy. And one of the novelties and one of the key things in the Paris Agreement, as opposed to the climate policy that we used to have before that, is that one of the very important factors of international climate policy were recognized the so-called non-state actors or non-governmental, well, not even organizations, but stakeholders. And one of such were the cities. And from the viewpoint of the climate policy, the urban development, it was a huge leap because it was recognized that urban areas, cities, should be the driving force. They should act as stakeholders in climate policy at the international level because they can do that. They have financial possibilities to do that, intellectual opportunities to do that, and cities are places that have lots of opportunities, but at the same time also have lots of risks. Therefore, with every new conference of the parties, with every new COP, we see that more and more attention is paid to the cities. That is why today we're gonna precisely talk about them. I will talk about some general type things about how you can approach this topic and what you can do in terms of picking the topics in the context of city adaptation to climate change. And Mariam will give you a case study about Georgia. Because if we're talking about climate change, it's important to talk about both adaptation and mitigation. Of course, there are some general trends for all the cities. Despite that, every city is unique. So it's very hard to cover all of that within one presentation and mention the adaptation measures that could be applicable for all cities. Okay, cities and climate change. How can we prevent possible adapt to the unavoidable? Well, thank you so much, Annika, for introducing me so well. I don't have anything to add, actually. So let's proceed with the presentation. We all know that we're living in the era of the climate change, and I believe that you have heard a lot about that. We're not gonna dwell upon it for a long time. I would like to only remind you, our climate is changing, and it is an obvious fact. The temperature of the air over the last 100 years has increased for about 1 degree compared to the pre-industrial level. And in the Northern Hemisphere, we believe now the temperature is increasing way more rapidly. Aside from that, if we look at the dynamic of risks, we can tell that risks related to climate change, the risk related to change of biodiversity, and other types of environmental risks are now coming to the forefront. And if a decade ago, the main risks were related to economy, policy, and politics, now the main risks, according to the experts, and this is the data from the World Economic Forum report, and they publish it annually. And according to the expert assessments and evaluation, the risk is that our climate actions will not be sufficient, and this is basically what precisely discussed at COP at the moment, is coming to the forefront more and more. And sadly, so far, our effort is not sufficient. It is not enough, because to respond to climate change in a better way, we have to stop the growth of the global temperature by 1.2 degrees by the end of the century, but it has already increased by 1 degree. And the maximum threshold for us is 2 degrees. But now, with all the effort that the countries have assumed and promised to implement, we're now following the trajectory that leads us to the temperature increasing by 3 degrees by the end of the century. And of course, it's gonna lead to huge challenges, because even if the temperature increases 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, there will be dramatic change. And that change, we're only at the start of this change. And according to the assessments of the researchers, even if we stop greenhouse gases emissions now in some magical way, main climate change are waiting for us in the coming decades, because greenhouse gases have the tendency to pile up in the atmosphere, and it is pretty hard to remove them from there. So we're living in the era of climate change. We have created that ourselves. We are now trying to slow down this process, but nevertheless, we should keep in mind that everything that we're doing, everything that we're planning, our entire infrastructure, social and economic structure will exist in different conditions in the coming few decades. So what do we need to do? We need to decrease impact on climate and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to the unavoidable change. But at the same time, we have to provide opportunities for the economic and social development, because In fact, as we're well aware, one of the key things in the international climate policy is the answer to question, how do we give opportunities to the developing countries so that their towns and cities can provide for the proper life of their citizens? And we have to stick to the first two conditions, which is decreasing impact and adapting to climate change. Now, cities. Urban development. Probably the biggest news here is that starting early 2000s, we have been living at the city dwellers planet. Before 2000s, if we take the previous eras, their majority was formed by the rural population, but it has changed. And now we see that the role of cities is growing, therefore the population of the cities is also increasing. The level of urbanization will be increasing in almost all regions worldwide. It will also be happening in Europe and Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe will already live as a pretty urban region already now. Nevertheless, we'll see growth, further growth. On this bar graph, you can see the level of urbanization in percent, but of course we can see that mostly we see growth in Asia and Africa in their urban population. Nevertheless, the share of people in Eastern Europe who live in the cities will also keep increasing. So what is happening in the cities, what is happening with the city dwellers becomes more and more important for us. Okay. Talking about city and climate, we can look at it from two perspectives, from two angles. First and foremost, the city impacting the climate. Cities and urban territories are a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions for a clear set of reasons, because in the cities, we have the main energy consumption. About 75% of energy that is consumed in the cities. And it is clear that cities also are the heart of most production facilities. And as urban territories are increasing and urban population is also growing, we understand that more energy is consumed and more greenhouse gases are emitted. But at the same time, the good news is that cities can also form part of the solution, because cities have all of their scientific and research potential that hopefully will allow us to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions, to cut them. And according to the recent assessment, the greenhouse gases emissions in the cities can be decreased by 20% by 2050. Even if we're applying the current technologies. Aside from that, city is a pretty peculiar environment, and the fabric of the city, the plan of the city impacts climate in the city. They are creating microclimate within the city, such a well-known thing as heat islands, for example. Well, we can say that this is a bad news if we're talking about the climate change, but a good news is that if we approach this matter in a responsible way, we can manage climate, microclimate of our cities with the help of the same tools that we are creating, with the help of construction, planting greeneries, working with wind flows. But again, it's not going to happen on its own. We have to work on it. On the other hand, climate impacts the city. And here we could say that climate impacts the city that's just the same way as it impacts other territories. But when we look at how climate impacts the city, we should understand that climate impact in the city, because city is a very concentrated territory. There is a high concentration of people, high concentration of infrastructure, facilities. So basically, the city's impact on climate is also very concentrated. Here we can talk about impact on food supplies, because we know that cities consume most of the supplied food. Over 70% of food is consumed, but very little food is produced in the cities for clear reasons, because the majority of foods is produced in rural areas. Aside from that, in modern cities, the majority of food is produced far away from the city, even sometimes far away from the country where the city is located. For the cities that are located close to the shore, close to the water, another relevant issue is increase in sea levels. And it is relevant Also for some cities that are pretty far from the sea, because change of conditions in one city impacts another city. And if the city becomes smaller because it is located closer to the sea, the people will migrate to a different city. Also, increase in temperature and problems with precipitations. For example, in Belarus, according to the forecast, the total amount of precipitation probably is not going to change that much in the coming years and decades. But we can see that how extreme different periods are is changing. There are more drought periods and periods with excessive precipitation, which results in flooding, especially in urban cities where everything is covered in asphalt, where using traditional construction technologies, water drainage is mostly happening with the help of the engineering infrastructures and sewers. But when there is the excess water, urban territory becomes the most prone for floods. And some of such phenomena can be a disaster. And this is what Mariam is going to talk about using the case study of Tbilisi. And such phenomena, floods and droughts, are becoming more and more frequent in the city. Of course, impact on buildings and infrastructure. First and foremost, because any infrastructure in any city in the world was built taking into account climate conditions. If such conditions change, clearly the usage of this infrastructure also changes. And if we're talking about food, of course, we cannot omit talking about the quality and quantity of water, because city consumes a lot of water, both technical water and potable water that is consumed by the people. And the quality and quantity of this water is also changing. So, as we have already mentioned, cities have their own risks that are explained by the high density of population, high density of infrastructure, and high potential price of the damage done. But at the same time, there are opportunities, which is scientific and research potential, the opportunities in management and planning. And we have already mentioned that cities are discussed more and more and taken into account more and more in terms of planning global climate policy, because it becomes obvious that two cities of the more or less same size in the same conditions probably have something to talk about, even more so than two countries, because people are faced with the same problems. And this is precisely why this process explains that in the recent decades, basically, we saw the increase of some urban unions, international programs, such as the Covenant of Mayors, European Covenant of Mayors, Global Covenant of Mayors, such unions of cities as C40, which is a union of the largest cities, and the cities are trying to solve it. So how do they solve it?
И планирование можно разделить на несколько основных блоков.
So we can divide into different areas. First of all, the city has to be aware of what is going to happen. It means estimation of climate risks and the possibility of what could happen. Then climate resilient planning and specific solutions. And we know that it is impossible to plan separately how the city would be developing and how the city would be solving the climate risks. These two programs and processes, they have to be interrelated. For example, decisions that the city is taking, they have to be compliant with the general climate strategy of the city. In order to decrease the negative climate impact that a city is doing, we have to adopt specific measures, for example, low carbon economy development. And since we're working with these risks, the new risks, we see new problems, for example, such as climate justice and solving social problems that become more and more acute in the context of climate change. Speaking about adaptation processes and decreasing the risks, a city could take a number of different solutions, so-called gray technologies and infrastructures, green measures like ecosystem solutions, and soft solutions This is everything that includes policy making, planning, financing, IT, including education, campaigning, everything that brings together the first two types of measures. The gray measures and infrastructural solutions are the most common solutions that we see. They are classical, if you will. At the same time, they are the most costly, and in this constantly changing conditions of uncertainty, when we don't know how exactly we're able to mitigate the climate change and how the situation will develop for the future, the gray measures are the most reliable. Here, for example, you have an example of the biggest infrastructure project on the flood protection. This is a Thames barrier infrastructural project. It has been constructed around 40 years ago, and we were just entering this epoch of climate change, and it was considered that this barrier would be used 3 to 4 times per year, while now it is being used 6 to 7 times per year, and the forecasts are suggesting that the usage of this barrier will grow year to year. So this large infrastructural project could be financed, could be upgraded and improved depending on the circumstances, but if these are smaller projects, let's say coastline cities and settlements react to the increased sea level, they are building small dams. So this little project could attract a lot of financing, a lot of investments, and could be built, but in 20 or 30 years, they will not be applicable anymore. So this type of infrastructural solutions, they are good for the short term, but not for the long term. Not all cities are capable of building such huge dams like in London, but for example, in St. Petersburg, there are also large solutions that are being applied to protect the city against the floods. But in many cities, smaller projects are being used. For example, those of you who live in European cities, probably you have noticed that quite often in the streets you can see such temporary walls that protect the city from the water flows, from the floods. Another simple solutions include increase of the level of the buildings, bringing it higher. For example, here on the picture you see the higher threshold in the entrance to the underground, to the subway. So when there is heavy rain, this water flows wouldn't be getting inside. So in order to be more adaptive, we should use traditional technologies, because we all aware of the fact when, let's say, people live in the urban areas and in general in the regions where there are a lot of snow precipitations. I'm sorry. One moment. So, in those areas, you probably know that there is a very thick foundation for every building. In those areas where the temperatures aren't so low and there is not so much of snow falling out during the year, the foundations are generally lower. So more cities could start implementing this thicker and higher foundations for their buildings. The next group of measures is green measures, which includes ecosystems in order to protect the areas from different hazardous weather conditions. For example, such ecosystems could be used in order to prepare the protection against the heat waves. Let's say we know if there is a greenery, there are more trees planted around the building, it improves the heat protection and it decreases the usage of air conditioners. Green solutions are often being used in order to prepare the floods, hazardous situations. So these are so-called draining systems that redirect the water flows from specific areas. We already mentioned that water floods happen when the area is asphalted and this water is being streamed into the city. So the question is how to create such areas within the urban places where we could plant more trees. That would be helpful, but on the same side, how it could be convenient, comfortable, for example, wouldn't be a nest for various insects. So in general, the measures and solutions which we find, this is a mixture of gray and green measures. Green measures, gray measures, for example, they help us to implement some industrial solutions. For example, use some specific membranes to filter the water which is being absorbed into the soil is already pre-filtered. So we shouldn't just plant more trees, but we have to approach these solutions in a smart way, combining both and green measures. Soft measures, in their turn, include policies, regulations, campaigning, informing. Here, as an example, you can see a geosystem in Norway. And in many other countries around the world, there are very similar systems of alarming, of notifying about unfavorable weather conditions. For example, there you could see a system on the previous slide of informing agricultural communities. So these type of systems, when integrated well, they help to build low-carbon economy. I wouldn't go deeper here, but it is important to say that while planning this development strategy, we have to understand the context well, because the global economy is being reoriented at the moment to low-carbon economy. This is a lengthy process, and in order to be compatible and in order to compete the market, cities have to find new solutions and to enter this new trends, this new economy. One of another topical things is climate justice and ensuring climate justice, because urban areas have high density of population, which inevitably leads to emerging of so-called vulnerable groups, which includes elderly people, people with disabilities, women with children, etc. And when the environment becomes uncomfortable, it hits first and foremost those vulnerable groups. So here, for example, we have to avoid such situations. You can see in the picture, this is from Brazil, when trying to create some beautiful islands of nice environment, the climate injustice is being highlighted. So some people receive the preference of enjoying these beautiful areas, while other people have to suffer. So all the subjects, they have to be included into urban planning, but since this webinar is for journalists and for media representatives, this is the subject that journalists have to write articles about. Very often climate change is perceived by reporters, by journalists as a general climate problem, but all these topics are not standing alone. They are all interlinked with social aspects, with economical aspects, with many others. So the main set of tools includes climate planning, which should combine mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Many cities are already developing such strategies and have developed. Mariam is saying that Tbilisi has such a strategy already. In order to develop such a strategy or plan, one should adopt a systematic planning approach, bringing together different resources and tools in order to mitigate the risks and improve the advantages. And here all the parties have to participate in the process. So here we find such a peculiar aspect which suggests the following. In order to develop a climate strategy, this city has to have democratic governance. It seems at first that these things are not very much related, but they are very related. Specifically, if we want to create a business and production system which would be integrated into the green economy, it foresees cooperation of all different parties and hearing the voices of all parties, of all actors, be it business community, governance, state and regional authorities, or vulnerable communities, etc. I think this is it from me. These were the main points which I wanted to share. You can find more information in my book, The New City for the New Climate. If you have any questions, I'm here for you. And I'm giving the floor to Mariam for telling us what is happening in Georgia and in Tbilisi.
Thank you, Maria, so much. It's my pleasure to be on the...
Большое спасибо, Мария. Мне очень приятно. Oops, sorry, I'm talking in the wrong channel.
Turn off the original audio. So hello, everyone, and thank you, n-ost, for inviting me. I'm going to start sharing my presentation, and thanks, Maria, for this overarching presentation, which makes my speech even easier to understand, and for me as well to go deeply. My expertise is not in cities. I want to emphasize that. I work on adaptation. Currently, I'm working with UNEP on developing small-scale funding for mountain communities in South Caucasus on adaptation. So I work on adaptation solutions and also follow the policies, national and local ones. So I will try to give you some examples based on my experience. So these topics, so I will be focused on Georgia, and I'm also from Georgia. Firstly, I will start about some broad examples of vulnerability of Georgia to climate risks. And then I will try to focus on urban areas. And you know, the capital of Georgia is Tbilisi. So I will bring some examples based on policies in Tbilisi and climate risks. Then Maria already mentioned about Tbilisi resilience strategy that Tbilisi has. So I will try with you to go through these goals of this strategy and what is the state of implementation. And then I also want to share some findings of my research, which we just presented last week, about how women see these problems and needs in urban areas of Georgia. And then I will summarize with the systemic planning and need of systemic planning and barriers and problems for that. So in general, it cannot be said that there is any country which is not vulnerable to climate crisis. So each country is vulnerable to it, and so is Georgia. But we know there is also ranking, and depending on different factors, we can say this country or this area of the country or society is more vulnerable due to lack of preparedness, or having these resources or not, and so on. So in general, what I can say about Georgia, so we have this Fourth National Communication of Georgia to UNFCCC, and this is the main document we usually use to see what is the available data and what science says about vulnerability and impacts of climate change. And it's already Fifth National Communication preparation now in process. So this document says that 70% of the country's territory and up to 60% of settlements are susceptible to risks of different extent to climate change. And there is National Environmental Agency, and its geology department measures some the extent of vulnerability of different areas in Georgia, and it says as of 2018, 18% of Georgia's populated area were under high risk of geological hazards. So it gives us indication of the need of adaptation or loss and damage. And unfortunately, loss and damage has not been discussed in Georgia in any context. We have this Georgia's climate change strategy, and it specifically says that this strategy is about mitigation, not about adaptation. And then we have also National Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy of Georgia, but it was for 2017 to 2020. So it has not been updated either. And what is the problem here is that we don't have national adaptation plan, and the government always, or the ministry always say that they are waiting this document to be written, and then it will show us clear steps and solutions what we will need to undertake. So they are always postponing the responses and waiting for this national adaptation plan, which has not, the work has not started on it yet officially. So I also wanted to mention that before I will go to the urban areas, that in general it's high exposure to climate change risks in Georgia, and this year showed us this clearly. We had tragic landslide in high mountains of Georgia in Racha region, and it claimed the lives of 22 people. It showed also unpreparedness and of the state institutions to respond to disasters. So we realized that the emergency management service arrived at the disaster zone after 2 hours after this landslide, and after this event, not even after 1 month, we had another flooding in Guria, another area of Georgia, and 3 people died there, and at least 300 families need to be resettled. So it seems like in Georgia, unfortunately, we have ad hoc planning of the adaptation response, because we don't have a clear strategy or step-by-step processes going on to manage adaptation. That's why I hope this year will be a turning point for us to start transformational adaptation solutions in the country. Otherwise, we see clearly how all the damages we face due to that. So I will try to go now, focus on urban areas. What are the factors that define vulnerabilities of urban areas in Georgia? So in general, we see that due to lack of basic social services in rural areas, people tend to migrate in urban areas. Urbanization, that's why, has increased in last decades, which brought various changes in cities and challenges too. So it was around more than half population live in urban areas, and half of it lives in the capital. And we know that urbanization refers to expansion of urban centers, which is associated with modification in land cover, transforming natural land cover into dense concentrations of buildings, pavements, and other surfaces. So as a result, as Maria also explained, it creates urban heat island effect, and there are already researches which shows that Tbilisi experienced heat island effect. So the air temperature is much higher in the center than in suburbs of the city, it's relevant to Tbilisi, and it poses risks to serious illnesses and deaths. And due to, like, according various researches, it shows that elderly, people with chronic illnesses and poor health conditions, also people with lower income groups are more exposed to risks of heat waves. And it's a map by World Bank, which shows like traffic congestion in the center, that it's like accumulated there, which is also linked to the high air pollution. And I will go to the next slide, and I'm gonna also talk about other factors of vulnerability. So air pollution, as I mentioned, and it's a picture of industrial city close to Tbilisi. It's called Rustavi. There is a movement called Kavi Gudet, and it's picture taken by them. So it shows the air pollution, and it's really high. So air pollution in urban areas has already deteriorated health conditions, and in Tbilisi as well, but not only in Tbilisi. And according to public defender, air pollution was identified as the main reason for more than 6,000 deaths in Georgia. And another aspect is that available green spaces for people in the cities, which helps to people to combat heat waves and also have air quality. But unfortunately, green areas per capita is not determined for Tbilisi yet. Another aspect is also housing characteristics. And in some European cities, we see already they are adopting some criteria that is important to classify buildings as a climate resilient. But in Tbilisi, we don't have it yet. And in some cities, this is coastal city called Batumi. We see already storms are intensifying and also sea level rise. And you see these like main settlements and also infrastructure is accumulated along the coast, which makes them vulnerable to climate risks. Now I'm gonna focus on Tbilisi, and Tbilisi is also like facing many challenges due to climate change, which is mostly rainfall related floods, but it's enhanced like these effects because of Tbilisi's geomorphology, imperfectly controlled construction, malfunctioning drainage system, and so on. And Tbilisi encounters also other problems of landslides, ground instability, and seismic activities. And later on, I will tell you other problems associated with that, which makes the city vulnerable. And we had huge flooding in Tbilisi in the center of the city in 2015. And people died there, and also many families displaced. Infrastructure was damaged, including houses, roads, and including Tbilisi Zoo as well. So, and this is the picture like of the people mobilized next day to clean up a whole floodplain. Unfortunately, like all these institutions started to work on disaster risk management after this event. So it took several years maximum that they were working on it, even it was a committee established. And after that, this topic got lost in other topics. So it's not really active in Tbilisi right now working on it. And even worse, like this picture is current picture. We have this massive crack on the ground in Tbilisi, and we know it's moving, but we don't see any proper response how to manage this landslide. So yeah, heat waves frequency and duration is increasing. Increased risks make city infrastructure, including public transport, sensitive to hazards and extreme weather. And we know that public transport is mainly used by women, students, low-income people, and unemployed people in Tbilisi, which means that exposure of marginalized people to additional risks is increasing due to that. So focusing on policies of Tbilisi, we have this resilient Tbilisi strategy, and which says that by developing a resilience strategy, Tbilisi becomes more able to respond to adverse events and better able to deliver basic functions, especially to the more vulnerable in the city. It's a statement it tries to achieve, and it was based on different other policies, which is land use master plan, local economic development plan, sustainable urban mobility plan, which unfortunately it was the aim to have to start implementing already on 2019, but it has not been finalized yet. They start to, like, the City Hall published the draft last year, so it has not been finalized yet. We have Green City Action Plan as well, and then the Resilient Tbilisi was the final output. And I will also briefly mention what is the problems of implementing these policies in Tbilisi. So, for example, Tbilisi Green City Action Plan aims to renew the fleet of public transport buses with low or zero emission buses. But despite this commitment in 2018, when this action plan was already in action, Tbilisi City Hall purchased 90 diesel-powered buses. Then another failure is that these usually spatial planning documents are not mandatory for the cities to follow, and then responsibilities of representative bodies is not clear either. So usually, so when it's not required to implement the recommendations based on this master plan, usually we see that the decisions are different without any explanation, rather than recommended by master plan. So, for example, Tbilisi master plan offered that there should not be any recreational zoning changes in 11 areas, but they changed the status anyway for one around one lake area in Tbilisi, and started to redevelop this place. And also there was another case and people mobilized around it, but it didn't work, that about the dilapidated houses, that government started to adopt amendment and legalize all these dilapidated houses, which didn't met the standards before, so they changed some standards to let people start living in houses, even though they were not matching to the safety standards properly. So we see like these kind of failures or problems associated with implementing these action plans, even though we have it. And to focus on Tbilisi resilience strategy. So these are goals and actions it proposes. So, for example, coordinate an emergency response plan. And these are implementation of status of each plans. For example, establish an emergency response committee for Tbilisi, and it was in development phase at the time of adopting the resilience strategy, and it's still in development phase. It's the same with disaster response and recovery plan. These two are still aspirational, which refers to community emergency preparedness and risk awareness training program, or preparedness program for kindergartens. This multi-hazard risk assessment, it's they said in development, but it's not finished yet. We haven't seen the document and so on. So even though we have this strategy, it doesn't mean that we are that close to achieve its goals. Then I hope I have enough time to briefly go through the findings of my research. It was actually covering whole Georgia and different climatic zones and different groups of vulnerable groups of women to identify some kind of, to assess vulnerabilities of women in Georgia to the climate crisis. So I tried to bring here some examples based on the urban focus. So it has been representative for urban areas as well. Later I can send you a link if anyone will be interested to see the whole paper. So it seems that according to what women said, they experience the most severe impact comes for them from heat waves, and it was 60.8%, which said it impacts their health conditions. Then it was mentioned droughts, and which they linked droughts with the health deterioration problems, reduced work capacity, and reduced food supply. In general, it was mentioned that access to services are problematic in urban areas as well, not only in rural, and in Tbilisi as well. And they said all this, especially for public transport, access to it deteriorates significantly and delays during bad weather. So the transport system is not adapted to extreme weather events. Then there were some problems also mentioned, and I was also trying to identify what are the environmental problems associated with urban areas for women. And it was said the most mainstream answer was about air pollution, increasing cars, intensive construction. Women also worry about chaotic development of the settlement, disordered sewage system, pollution. And according to them, these and other environmental problems worsen their and their children's health, and children's problems were also mentioned many times. And sense of safety, increase stress, and creating women's mobility problems. So I will also add some other findings. So women worry about green spaces, not only in Tbilisi, in other urban areas, that they don't have many places left where they can bring their children to play safely. And they say these green spaces are decreasing, and access to them is also being restricted because some places people need to pay for some parks to get inside. So they were really concerned about it. And women say that parks in urban places help them to be closer to nature, enjoy its aesthetics, socialize, and cope with the summer heat. And since there are not many places like that in summer, the demand to go outside from cities is increasing. However, according to them, it's getting more and more luxurious option because it's getting more expensive. And they are concerned that they don't have much places where they can bring their children close to natural environment. And I have quote here, when you want to take your child to the fresh air, it should not be worth the whole year saving. There must be some places in the city where you can rest with the child. And another problem was about non-adapted infrastructure for women with disabilities. So I have quote here that such problems exist in many places. The bus is adapted, but not the infrastructure to get to the bus stop. And another problem which people started to discuss about in Georgia is access to healthy food, because there is not quality control by the state, and the prices is increasing, so there is not really reliable information which is bio or organic products in general. So there were so many other interesting findings, but I realized climate crisis is more expressed and shows itself more in rural areas due to many systemic problems and also geomorphology of Georgia. So I can share it later with you. And I will try to start finalizing what I just said and make emphasis of barriers, problems, and needs to enhance systemic planning of adaptation in Georgia and specifically in Tbilisi. So there is no legal requirement so far for developing and implementing a city-level climate adaptation plan. So currently, Georgia is working on climate law. So I hope we will see this kind of legal requirement for that. Even though we have Tbilisi's signatory of Covenant of Mayors and it has some kind of obligation, but they always try to postpone it and it's not legally binding. And in general, I see that we have lack of understanding of adaptation and understanding its importance, not only in Tbilisi, in whole Georgia, even among the climate experts, since we see more emphasis comes on mitigation. Lack of data, evidence for the city-level adaptation and absence of effective monitoring and evaluation systems. Even though we have monitoring and early warning systems at 2, if I'm not mistaken, areas of Tbilisi, but I saw some reportages by journalists that they are not working and GPS systems are not operating at all with that early warning system. So I don't know if we can call it that we have this kind of system or not. Lack of resources, so can it be financial or human resources and expertise in this field within the city hall? Adaptation needs to be embedded across various strategies and action plans. Can it be green city plans or mobility strategies? Collaboration between institutions on adaptation, and I see in the countries where countries work on adaptation more, it's huge collaboration of different institutions, academia or decision makers on business or everyone. So, but in Georgia, it's huge gap. Focuses on mitigation is also perceived in, I've heard in many discussions that it seems it's perceived as a barrier for effective adaptation, that cities try to have more focus and ambitious plans for mitigation since it's more encouraged, and then people say, oh, it's an undermining adaptation goals. And I can say it's relevant for Tbilisi as well. We have short-term and ad hoc view on adaptation issues and risks. Unfortunately, when we see hazards is happening, then we have failures that we are not prepared for that. And last but not least, to implement existing policies and adopt more holistic approach. Maria mentioned different solutions of adaptation, and I usually say, for me, infrastructure building is just a mainstream approach, and we should try to adopt divisions for long term. So it could be changes in land cover use and avoid transforming land into urban land cover, which increases the risk of flooding of the city. This could be one solution. So I would like to see more long-term visions in terms of adapting cities and political will, of course, of that. The final words, it will be, it's the quote again from the resilience strategy. It says need of a resilient and vibrant city where residents are protected and safe, where there is access to opportunity and healthy natural environments, and where we, I guess, decision makers are empowered to plan ahead, ready respond to any challenge. And this is what we want to see. And I guess every citizens of this country and of this city. But so far we see we are really far from there. And there is a huge need of transformational change, and especially in planning of this city. So I hope we will get there one day. Thank you so much. In case you have questions, I will be happy to address them, or you can also contact me anytime at these emails. Thank you, and over to n-ost.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. It was extremely interesting, I think, the theoretical introduction and this example of Tbilisi. Actually, I have a very spontaneous question to you, Mariam. Do you think that the mud flow and the catastrophe that happened this summer, will this have any impact on the next elections in a way? Do you think that people will start to hold local governments responsible for what they have not been doing?
Yeah, I wish I could have answer on that, but we see that political parties started to be interested in this topic, and they ask experts to help them to understand what's going on and what could be the effective mechanism to cope with that. But this landslide case, it has not been investigated properly, and even the government institutions tried to propose some ideas, but it's not based on science. And so they say that it was not possible to mobilize at the site earlier than 2 hours after the landslide. So these kind of things they try to manipulate. But I hope this will be good example, unfortunate but good example to show what are the needs and also to push to the decision makers, whoever it will be after elections or before, to prioritize these problems, because we see this year has been really year of hazards and disasters for Georgia, and it has, if not now, I think what else can be. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there is a question in the chat, but I can't read it because I don't read Russian. I don't know whether one of you maybe can. Okay.
Я могу прочесть. Давайте тогда мы сделаем так.
Okay, I will be reading the question. So Mariam will stay in the English channel, will be speaking English, and I will be speaking Russian for us to have the language balance. So there are questions. There are two questions. One is about the democratic governance. What tricks the Belarus government can do in its pretending of doing something to the city? And the other question, what measures of adaptation could be used in Belarus cities? Well, the answer is the following. Look, I'm always trying to focus on what could be done rather than on who is not doing what, because there are so many things that are being missed and there are so many gaps that it's better to focus on at least something that could be done. So taking your question, look, quite often, based on my experience, there is such a prejudice, such a feeling, such a prejudice, and that there are some good and kind citizens and very bad representatives of the authorities. And speaking about Belarus, cities don't have the autonomy that they need in order to implement the measures for climate change adaptation. And look, Mariam shared Tbilisi, but if she was presenting Batumi, another Georgian city, and Georgia is a small country, in Batumi there would be different measures, different adaptation plans. That is why when we are talking about climate change and adaptation measures, politically, cities should receive autonomy to the extent that would be enough, because they are knowledgeable of their situation, of their population, of the possible solutions. And this is the very first step. And unfortunately, in such countries as Belarus, even before those political events, we're not talking about the current situation, but even before that, the regime which is governing the country now is not favoring adaptation to climate change. Speaking about tricks or possible measures how to trick the government into helping the cities, well, I wouldn't say about the tricks, but almost everything that has been done in the climate policy field has been implemented under the framework of international programs. And these were programs that were supported by mayors. And you know that Mariam has shared that Tbilisi is another city which is a subject of mayor agreements. And these international programs were the main driving forces, because some cities, they were under this mayor international agreements. So there were these covenants of mayors. So we have to say that in Belarus, there were quite many cities where the city administration was sincerely interested in taking part in such processes, partially for receiving better financing, which is not that bad, and partially due to the fact that in some smaller towns, city administrations were trying to do something. But now, with the political landscape change, all of those measures, they ceased. And no any tricks are being implemented in order to pretend that cities are being adopted. Well, I think this mass planting of trees for a nice picture to show that the employees of this plant or factory, they planted those trees and they make this picture. Well, at them planting, well, maybe it is something, but we know that no one is taking care of those trees afterwards and they are dying out. Well, this is not adopting, but planting trees, if you ask me, is more about ecological literacy. Let's say someone is saying, we have nothing for environment, so let's plant the trees. It seems to me like people are saying, oh, let's do something nice together, without really knowing. So we have a lot of companies contacting us saying we want to have a team building activity, we want to plant trees, but if we say taking into account the urban planning, we have to approach it in a smart way. It's not just digging a hole, a pit in the ground and putting there a tree. It's not enough to check it out. I was saying, and Mariam was saying, that the cities should be greener. But if we take a deeper look, the urban area is the area that has to be adopted for its citizens. And very often people now say that these thoughtless planting of trees has its own negative consequences. Now we see very popular trend of urban meadows. It is a very good idea, but it, in its turn, provokes high growth of population of insects, including mites. So we don't want to invite wild nature into the town. We want to invite nature, but not wild nature, because town is the place for people. So the planning should be very smart planning. So wherever you are going, you will always see that there should be tight collaboration of all actors, and the foundation should be scientific, a strong scientific foundation. Mariam was saying that in those cities where the smart climate strategies are being developed, at least several institutes, universities are being invited, and there should be good coordination. So some of these measures, they could push the agenda a little bit forward, but it wouldn't do much, because on the one hand, when people are planting trees, well, maybe that's good because they are thinking about nature, and having team building activity on building bushes is better maybe in a way than a team activity on strike ball or some other, I don't know, quest activities. But yeah, they are becoming more aware, but it has to be better integrated. I'm sorry, I took more time.
Thank
And
you
the
very
second
much.
question?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, the second question was which measures would be ideal. Yeah.
Well, different adaptation measures, very different. Very different adaptation measures. Everything has to start with risk assessment. In some area, you will see that an adaptation measure will include flood protection. In another city, you would see that it would be about a campaign, informational campaign on water filtering for the agricultural community. If it is a smaller area somewhere in Belarus, so there is no one solution for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a second question from Vladimir. It's about rooftop solar panels to adapt energy systems to heat waves. I don't know whether one of you is an expert on solar energy on the roof, but in Berlin, this is very popular now, and the city government is even promoting it and supporting it financially. So I don't know, what's your opinion on it?
Well, I can try, but to be honest, in terms of adapting energy system and especially solar panels to heat waves, I know that solar panels work during heat waves, but if it's too intense, solar panels might face problems. But I don't have really expertise in that field. That it's better to ask those people who understand this deeply. But what I can say in general, what we see, it's not about these tiny solar panels on one house. It's also, there should be also vision how to adapt the whole energy system to the climate change risks. And these kind of plans haven't even been discussed in my country. And it's same for the transport system, for example. And this year we also faced that trains stopped working because the road was flooded, and it was for 3 days, I guess. The main train, which goes from east to west to Georgia, stopped working due to these floods. So I wanted to say it's important to have a vision for whole system. But regarding to this installation itself, I'm not really sure. Sorry. If Maria, do you know anything about that?
Ну, опять же, я могу только поддержать то, что сказала Мариам, потому что
Well,
здесь
once
надо...
again, I could support Mariam. I could say that it is important to turn to experts, but what I could add, if we are saying that solar panels are the measure to adopt, we speak about generation of electric power. And do you mean that it will supply electricity for air conditioning? Well, there are many other ways to adapt to heat waves, and solar panels are a good way as substitute measure or additional source of power. But if we say that we have to use air conditioners as the only adaptation solution for the heat waves, this is not the best way. There are many other measures that help to improve heat and insulation of the building, for example, planting more trees or using the shades, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question concerning the participatory approach and other methods. I guess this is a question on the way that local or rules in general are made in order to include as many citizens and people as possible and to have their say in these regulations. So Mariam, you already draw a bit on this because you said that in Georgia, obviously, there's a lack of this and a lack of cooperation between different institutions and a lack of really addressing people's needs. Do you know whether there are better ways of drafting legislation in other countries?
Actually, we have the law and we have ratified Aarhus Convention, which is about public participation in environmental decisions. So according to law, before adopting any kind of decision or issuing permit to certain projects, they should be consulted with the wider public. So there are procedures also written, what are the required procedures that the projects should go through before getting the environmental permits. So we have this, but we face many problems of implementing this, and sometimes they are just for legitimizing their decisions. So just to say shortly, we have this, but we have problems of implementing this to have meaningful participation.
Well, maybe because we for several times already touched upon this problem of implementation and of holding governments accountable for what they are doing or not doing, maybe we could talk a little bit about the role of journalists and media in this. I mean, actually, it's the media who could inform people and really build up this public pressure, maybe. So people really demand something from their governments. But I don't know. I know, of course, Tanya, but I don't know whether all the other participants, whether they are really journalists or rather NGO people. So maybe we could discuss a little bit about how to really intensify this climate reporting and this building up of a public pressure. Tanya, you recently have written something about urban development and greening. So maybe what you can tell us a little bit about what you found out during your research.
Well, me personally, no, I didn't publish anything recently and didn't write anything recently, but we had a series of articles where we explain how the forest was planted out, and then people were going out to check the development and the what has happened to this newly planted forest, and then people saw that actually trees were dying out, and we were writing and we were covering it as a fact. Could I add something here? Well, when Mariam was speaking about the interaction and cooperation in the planning, urban planning, we don't have only two groups of citizens and governments. We have also business and science as additional groups. Citizens are not experts. We always say that citizens are experts of their life. They can just say, well, I like a park, or it's too hot where I am. But they are not experts, and governments should rely on scientific knowledge. So citizens, they can't pay for the services they want, and business has to be invited. So in order for the system to work and this cooperation to function, the role of media is very significant. They should write about it. And media very often they look for some drama. For example, citizens want something and the city administration doesn't give it to them. But the taking into account like more holistic approach, journalists could write about some specific topics or some specific project that is being proposed by the university to the city administration. But it is very important. Maybe it is less dramatic than other subjects, but I would ask journalists, because very often they come to experts and they say, oh, give us some subject which would give us a very dramatic title. And we want them to write something important and to make it so interesting that people would read it.
Читать, да? И вот здесь вот это вот и есть вот это.
We're asking them, how about to write a title that would make people interact with the material that you're preparing? Okay, this is the end of my response.
I don't know, Ira, whether we have another question in the chat, maybe in Russian, or is it the one we already discussed before? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about Green City Action Plan, right?
No? Okay. Okay, are there any other questions from the side of our participants?
Да, есть, конечно. Добрый день.
Yes, of course. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. My name is Vladimir. I'm from Gomel, which is located in southeast Belarus. And I would like to say that, well, first of all, I'm the head of the youth union, and we were talking about universities, about academia, because presently we have very little experience in working with the renewable energy sources. Vladimir asked a question. So what do we do in this regard? For example, our residents, of course, mostly are using some primitive solar collectors to heat up the water at their summer houses or at home. This is one of the ways. But in terms of the planning at the urban level, we have very few suggestions and very few examples. For example, some large corporations such as Belarus Oil, Belarus Neft, they did install solar panels, and some even built small power plants using solar power. But the problem is that presently, well, this probably does not form part of the state planning. Has our ministry or the Council of Ministers maybe contacted you to help them develop something? Well, you see, Vladimir, no one from Belarus has contacted me in years now. No one is contacting me. Well, and I probably also don't contact them too from my side. But yeah, in principle, we do have such programs. But again, if you'll talk to the energy experts, maybe they will give you a different response. But their programs were introduced in energy. And I also know that, for example, Belneftostraitelstvo in 2018, 2019, they started organizing public hearings of the master plans of the cities. And of course, you can criticize what they did, but at least, I know that for sure because I know these people, that they try to do that as much as possible. They try to make it as efficient as possible. But how well is that work carried out at the moment? Well, I think that these programs all are not operational anymore. And honestly speaking, I don't know what is happening with the energy sector. You know, I just wanted to share this pain with you. Because, you know, today, well, we're not even invited by the mass media, by the state-owned mass media, so we can only use our own website, our own social media, and our own social networks do that. They stopped inviting us, all in all. So if we take the southeast of Belarus, our Polessia, the crops are decreasing. There are droughts, there are floodings, there is a lack of water. Can you imagine it? In the southeast Belarus, we do not have enough water to get plenty of crops and a good yield. But so I don't know, we have to think, because we already have the new climate zones in the south of Belarus. And we have to think about how we can participate in that. How can we contribute to that? Because I do not know. Yes, we used to work with Nigeria and we did some calculations. So we do not have enough water to, for example, in Moser Rayon, we cannot get the sufficient number of water to grow crops and grow vegetables. So we have to somehow bring it, deliver it to increase the yield. So I thought that maybe you, as the experts, as professionals who are dealing with climate change, could somehow impact it. Let's think about how we can do that together, having united our efforts. Well, for example, the project that EU for Environment that was mentioned, no, it wasn't mentioned here. I'm sorry, it was mentioned EU for Climate. It was mentioned during a different event. They developed the national adaptation strategy and it was almost ready, but then it stopped. But again, this is our very peculiar situation in Belarus. And here we probably have to also look at other countries such as Georgia, what can be done there, because there, with all the challenges that I understand, they are, well, there is a better collaboration there. But in Belarus now we just have to talk about it. We have to look at every case individually. Honestly speaking, it's hard for me to even imagine what is happening with adaptation in Belarus at the moment, because it's been a few years since I stopped working with the Belarus-related international programs. Okay, we'll try to impact and influence that, but maybe we could get at least some kind of methodological guidance from you, some recommendations. Okay, let's discuss it separately then. Yes, okay, because we're discussing, even though we have a regional seminar, but we're talking about our own Belarus things. Yeah, okay, thank you. It was a pleasure, likewise. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much. I just had a short look on my mobile phone on the watch, and so unfortunately, we already are running out of time, and so I think we have to discuss everything else bilaterally if we want to go on discussing some things. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Maria and Mariam, for your interesting inputs, but also thank you, Jana and Alina, for your interpretation. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming and attending. So see you very soon again. Hopefully very soon we will have a new topic in this series of webinars on climate change. Thank you very much and have a nice Wednesday.